laughing all day watching things that Bill Kirchenbauer has been doing on the internet for the last, I don't know, maybe 40 or so years, I would guess.
Oh, yeah, probably. I
He's
hate
here. This is Bill Kirchenbauer. You guys, if you don't know
thank
him,
you.
Google it. It stands for Cherries and Trees or Cherry Builder.
No, a church builder.
Church Builder. I was so close.
Cherry is Kirchen, and church is Kirchen.
Thank you.
But so people do confuse that a lot. But it means church builder.
You're right. I should have Googled it myself, but I was afraid to. I'm so glad you're here. You rock it when you're on the Tonight Show. Oh my gosh, you give it your all. You get applause breaks. You break out in a sweat. You've been all over sitcoms, everything. Mork and Mindy, The 10 of Us, you wrote. You created that show. Right?
Well, I didn't create it. No,
No?
the producers created it, and they came to me. I had other ideas of doing something, but they're the producers. They get to call the shots, and I was happy with it. But it's not exactly what I would have picked. I would have picked more like a male Roseanne, which actually came on about the same time that my show did.
I'll be darned.
But that ran for 3 years. 3.5 years, and then it ran for about 6 or 7 on USA Network. I remember traveling around Asia and seeing myself I think I was in Hong Kong or Singapore. I was in Singapore, and I was speaking Chinese. So I thought that was pretty good. I thought, oh, look at that. And then, so they had dubbed it. But it doesn't run really anymore because they had music, and there was a lot of music on the show, and evidently they did not clear it into perpetuity. And so I think that's a little problem. I don't know, maybe one day some studio head or network head will die, and then they'll do something else, bring some young guy in or something. I don't know. It's totally beyond my control. So.
Wow. So tell me about, what's it like to be born in Salzburg, Austria, and making yourself a star in America, known around the world, speaking every language in China, God knows what other languages it's transferred to. What's it like to come from Salzburg, Austria, to the mother country of all places where anything you want can come true, and it does come true for you?
Well, I was very lucky. I was unlucky in some respects and very lucky in others, in that I was an orphan. And I was in my parents that adopted me over there. They were, my dad was in the Army, and he was stationed over there, and they couldn't have any children, so they went to the local orphanage. And I was very sick. I had some sort of, I don't know, something. And I never knew this. My mother told my wife, and my wife just recently told me, but my adopted mother told my wife that they were going to euthanize me. And so they pretty much saved my life. I don't know what I had, flu or something, but this was post-war Austria, and there were probably a lot of orphan children. But I was very lucky then, and then I got adopted by my parents, and they brought me back to the United States, and I became a naturalized citizen, and I was given an opportunity that I never would have gotten over in Austria if I had survived.
Wow, that's crazy. My parents survived the Holocaust in Germany. And so, yeah, I mean, that's really nothing. I didn't do anything. They did it all. But so I had to go over to Europe and see Europe. And I fell in love with Salzburg. What age were you when you left?
Oh, I was like 11 months. I don't remember. The only thing I remember is from 8mm movies that they took of me walking around and them carrying me around, and a lot of this these old films I'm actually using in my movie that I've made called Taking Al Back Home, which is the documentary about me taking my dad's ashes back up to Michigan, where he wanted to be buried, or he wanted his ashes spread on this river there that ran through his hometown. And he died, and he had his ashes, and my mother got him, and then she died, and I had both of their ashes. And I'm planning on leaving the country in the next 6 months or so. And I told my wife, I said, and for all the things that he did for me, the least I can do is make this last wish. So I knew I live in Austin, Texas, and I either had to drive or fly up there. And I thought, well, if I drive, maybe I should just make a little movie about it. So I found a guy with a camera, and then I found another crew in Iowa that continued with us on up there, and I made a movie about it. I'm still editing it. It's been about 2 years, but I've been making use of these 8mm movies to recreate the whole story.
Oh, that's going to be wonderful. When is that going to come out?
I don't, I'm hopefully by the end of the year, it'll be done. In fact, I was just working on it today with some pictures, scanning old pictures and finding out things about my dad, who was a highly decorated soldier. He did some heroic thing that we talk about in the movie in New Guinea. He was in this bunch of group called the Ghost Mountain Boys. And what they did was they had to go over this mountain range to sneak up behind the Japanese who were on the northern side of New Guinea. And surprise, surprise, they're coming in the back door. They're not coming from the ocean. And so it was a horrendous, terrible thing of them going over these mountains. Because there was, snakes and mosquitoes and mud and moistness and just, lack of food and lack of sleep and lack of hot, and just, it was a torturous experience. And I never really knew about this because he never talked about it. So a lot of that's explained in the movie too. And it's not just his story. I mean, his story was, his story, but there are thousands of people, men like this, that were brave enough to do this kind of thing. And that's kind of it's their story too.
Yes. Oh, I can't wait to see this movie. I can't wait.
Me neither. Me too.
How many books have you written about your life? You've got to, if you
Books?
haven't.
I haven't written a book. I don't know if anybody would be interested. You know what? I consider the stuff that I put on Facebook kind of my book, because I really was never. I'm not a good writer, but I've done more writing in the last, say, 5 years on Facebook, writing my thoughts and writing my stories and finding pictures and putting them up. I guess all I'd really have to do is grab all that stuff and put them together. I don't know. I don't think I'm done yet. I'm moving to Thailand, so I think I'll have a lot of time on my hands. So I may do that kind of stuff. I have a podcast now called the Kirchenbauer Half an Hour.
Yes.
At halfanhour.com, HAFFENHAUER.com. And I tell a lot of those stories on there too, but I speak better than I write. So it's easier for me to speak than to write. So I've been putting a lot of stuff on that too, but maybe I'll come up with a book one day. I don't know. I don't know who will buy it after I hear friends of mine that have written books and what they've gone through. But well, thank you. I appreciate it. We'll see. I've done a lot of things. When I get to Thailand, I'm going to be doing a vlog called Fat and Bald in Bangkok. And I'm going to be going around and exploring Thailand, because it's a very interesting country. So that'll give me something to do. Maybe I'll think about a book. We'll see. If anybody wants to just scroll back on my Facebook pages,
I will.
Just about everything. Though very often, though, I remember stuff that I've forgotten. I see TV shows I forgot I was in.
I watched you on Johnny Carson.
Mm-hmm. I did 14 Tonight shows.
Oh my gosh! And you're
15 if you count the rerun.
I died laughing. I mean, you are really, like some people that use things in a bag and bring them out would get snickers and sneers, but you do it in I don't know, it's magic when you're doing it, because you're doing it at a different level with the ability of a lot of years of practice. You know what I mean? Like somebody at my level would do it and get rotten tomatoes.
Right. I have props in my act, but I don't consider myself a prop comic, because I'd say maybe 20% of what I do involves props. But I will say that you're quite right in the analyzation. There's one thing to bring props out and just, the prop is the joke. It's another thing to bring props out. The prop is a joke, and you have a bit to go along with it.
Yes, that's what
That's
it
what
is.
a lot of times there's a redheaded prop comic that I've seen out there doing stuff, and he, from what I've seen, and Gallagher uses props, and he has bits to go with them. But just to take out a prop and go, oh look, it's a potato something, or you have a potato with an arrow in it, or you have some sort of pun. It's like a visual pun sometimes. But to have the prop and then do the bit. I mean, like I have this rubber hand, I bring out the hand, but I have bits to go along with that. And again, I don't consider myself a prop comic, though I do have a couple of objects I use because it's visual.
Yes. And you just rock it. You get applause breaks. So, like I'm a young comic looking at a master doing something, and I can't dissect it, but I'm watching it and going, now that's how you do it. Whatever you're doing now, that's how you should do whatever you're doing.
Well, I believe in commitment. No matter what you're doing, even when I'm acting, and when you're doing something on stage, you got to be committed to what you're doing. And I studied mime for 3 years, so I'm very physical. That taught me how to get laughs without saying anything. And so and then I studied improv for about 3 years with some of the best improv people there are in American improv. And I just rolled it into a ball. Most people stop at that. They with your improv, they go into acting, and I did that too. But I took all that stuff that I knew, the improv, the mime, and voices. I did impressions. I did my impressions. I was known for doing impressions of inanimate objects, which comes out of mime. And I'm not the first one to do that. There was a guy, an older guy, I forget, I think it was Joey Corbett Monica, I think, did an impression of frying bacon, or no, that was Red Skelton. But, people have done inanimate objects before, but there wasn't nothing new. The ones I did were new, and I always had a punchline for those. It just wasn't a physical thing. It was, here's the inanimate object impression, and here's a punchline. Like my chewing gum, I think it's one of the better ones I do. I do the chewing gum getting chewed up, and then I stick my head underneath a chair. Oh, there's the punchline. So I just did with what I had. I've had people ask me before, well, how would you describe your act? And I've always said I'm like the Las Vegas comedy buffet. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of that, some entree, and then dessert.
My favorite thing of what you do is when you're doing the impression of their applause is blowing you off the stage.
Oh yeah, that's mine. The wind from your applause. Again, that's a mime. That's a mime thing. I will also say that and this goes through with most comedians, is that seeing them on television is one thing, seeing them live is another. I've seen guys on television and I go, I'm not that impressed, and then I've seen them live and I go, oh, well, that's different. So I certainly recommend no one judging anybody totally. If anything, they're probably better than what you see on TV.
Yes. Well, I could focus totally on your acting career because you've got credits out the yin yang, but to me, with, not that I'm being mean to you in any way, shape, or form about your acting. It's just that I get into who somebody is behind the mask and watching you on the Tonight Show, being interviewed, and I can read people like a book when they're doing their comedy on stage. That's how I get to, I study people on stage. I have to, or else I'm not going to.
I do too. I do too.
So the comedy is what's so stellar to me. It's so good I can't even dissect it.
Yeah, well, you really expose yourself when you get up on stage to do comedy. I mean, people kind of see, unless you're playing a character, and I do kind of play a character. I'm not really this, kind of, I don't know what I do. I just do what I do. Some of it's me, some of it's, a caricaturation of myself. But I don't know. I will say this is one thing I've always been a rule that I made to myself is never to be rote. I never do the same shit. In fact, that's the biggest compliment I can get is when people come and say, I've seen you 4 times and it's not the same show. And I said, well, I appreciate it, but I do that not only for the audience, because it gives the illusion of everything being fresh, which it isn't, but it gives the illusion of I just made this stuff up and stuff like that, which is another trick, if you will, that but every comedian should, serve hot, freshly made comedy to that audience, not something left over. So I always serve freshly made, right from the front of your eyes comedy. This is the way I do. This is the way this experience for this audience is, and I do it for them, and I do it for me, so that I don't get bored and go on automatic pilot. Which I have friends that really hate their acts because they've done the same thing, ever since they started because it worked. Yep. And to get out of that, then they dig themselves a ditch, and every year it gets deeper and deeper and deeper, and then they get to the point where they feel very uncomfortable with getting out of that safe zone, and then now you got a problem. And now you're just like a record. And yes. So I've never been rote, and I've never done it for my reason, so I don't get bored. And sometimes I surprise myself. Sometimes I'll come up with something where I say something, and go, oh, that was pretty funny, and and they know, people like, audiences like honesty. They like you to know that you're being honest with them.
Yes.
And that's important.
It's so important to be, authentically true to yourself. Like if you see me get up on stage and I'm talking about things that don't match how I look to you, then I should either address it or not talk about those things. Like we give mixed signals and we lose audiences. I mean, there's so much that goes into comedy. And, like I've been doing comedy 6 years, and with a brain injury. So every time I do a set, it's different for a whole nother reason. And, like people say, you should have a surprise punchline. It's a surprise if I remember the punchline. Are you kidding me? I got a brain injury. I just do the best I can, and people love
that's
that.
what you do. That's what you do. I always emphasize that comedians find their own style. Everybody's different. I mean, have you ever gone someplace and met somebody, go, oh, that person is exactly like this other person I know? People aren't the same. So the action, I see a lot of young comedians imitating other comedians that are popular now. Particularly, I see like a lot of Jim Gaffigan types. And this happened back when I started. You'd see guys trying to, they act like they were doing Robin Williams, or they act like they were doing Steve Martin, or, that kind of a thing. And it's hard not to be influenced, but you got to find yourself. You got to find your own voice. You got to be you. I always say it's like Cher. If you're in the car and you're listening to the radio and a Cher song comes on, you don't go, ooh, I wonder who that is. That's Cher. And it should be the same way with comedy, that people will say, oh, yeah. Because if I played, 2 minutes of Jim Gaffigan, oh, that's Jim Gaffigan. And that's the way it should be, so that you stand out, so that you don't blend in with everybody else. And that's about finding your own voice, finding your own style, finding your own style. That's the only way of personality on stage. That's what'll make you stick out. Otherwise, you're just going to blend in.
So I have a question about that. I do comedy on the West and East Coast at veterans hospitals. I walk in and go, where can I make people laugh? And eventually they'll let me because I don't go away. And so I was in this rehab facility trying to make the veterans that were sick in their laugh, and they didn't let me do the comedy for them. They made me do it for an employee mandatory meeting of volunteers who were hostile. So it was like doing comedy on make me laugh, they don't want to laugh. And I got fired from that gig after 5 weeks of trying 5 different styles of comedy for these mandatory meeting people. And they said, they decided they don't want you because, not that I wasn't trying, but because I was talking out of my own life experience. And that they decided based on that they didn't want me coming in because all I did was focus on myself. But that's what's popular in comedy now. So I was just wondering if you could elaborate on that scenario.
I will say something about that. Yes and no. I mean, when you do comedy, it's from your perspective. But I do see a lot of that when people talking about themselves, about like, oh, I'm a Mexican from Hawaii, or I'm a black guy who has only one leg, or I'm an American Indian who has $1 billion, or I'm, you know, this, and we all are different, but basically, comedy is about what you think about the world.
Okay.
So it is about you, but and I can see what they would say, because I see a lot of comedians on these Netflix things, and they do get up and talk about themselves, and it's good that people know who you are, but it's more they want to identify with things that you and they both know.
Got
so
it.
Instead of talking about Linda, and instead of talking about what Linda thinks about, let's see, this is very, I'm tripping over my words now. People want to see what your perception of the world is, and hopefully it's things that they can identify with, like grocery stores, as opposed to just your experience with things that you do.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
Totally makes it.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like everybody on Facebook's got, on Netflix has some sort of a thing about themselves. Me, and you know, I mean, Bill Cosby made it a career out of it, talking about him and his brother, and well, you know, and but ultimately, I really think it's about how telling people what you think about the world that you both share.
Got it. You know,
That's all I can say.
I appreciate it, because one thing about you is that you're straightforward. I wouldn't even be on here with Zoom looking halfway professional if you wouldn't have given me feedback. And I knew I could trust you with asking you about that, because you're a straight shooter. So thank you.
Now, some people don't like that, though. You know, I go on YouTube, and I told you this. I go on YouTube sometimes and try to tell people give them little tips, mostly on how to speak and how to present themselves. And of course, you don't need that. You do very well. But I mean, I watch these YouTube people, and they're like, and I'm like, and it's like, it's awesome. It's so awesome. And like, actually, I call it the Lees. Actually, definitely, really. All these filler words that people put in, awesome. You know, it's one thing, but if you're going to speak to people, it's one thing. If you want to sound like an idiot in your real life, that's fine. But if you're going to go on YouTube and do things, I mean, I see people pointing at the camera. You don't point at the camera. That's why Clinton invented this. You don't point at the camera and all these hand things. And people tend to get into little cliches in their head. And if I told you some, you'd know. All the time, people, again, I just said some of them, definitely. I see people definitely this and definitely that, and I'm definitely, that's just something they get in their head. And if you're going to, and anything you do repeatedly when you're speaking is going to annoy people, even if it's subliminally. And I try to give people tips, but here's the thing. If you can take most amateurs, they get offended, or like, well, I'm this, or they have excuses, which that isn't professional, because, you know, when you're an actor, even big movie actors, Academy Award winning stars have a director when they're on films that come in and say, now look, I want you to do this, but they don't go, well, I'm Robert De Niro and you're telling me. So that's the mark of an amateur, someone who won't listen to a valid critique. And like I said, I don't manage the Walmart up the street here. I've been doing this for quite a while, and I try to do that to help them. But some people, like you, take it to heart and look at themselves, and they grow. And I've seen this all the time. I mean, even with my Legends of Comedy show that I've helped people do these characters of different impressions of comedians. I give them little tips. Those that listen and try, they grow and do better. Those that take it as some sort of personal offense and, well, or make up excuses, those are the amateurs. Those are the people that never get anywhere because they want to, you know, live in denial. And that's fine. Either you're going to learn and grow or you're not.
Exactly.
But you accepted it and you actually followed through. And now here you are. Isn't it much better than the phone thing and all that?
Oh my
and it looked better. It sounded better. but it took some effort on your part, and you grew, and that's one of the reasons I agreed to do that. So that's good. You're open to listening.
Yes. You know, I have noticed that, and let's open up this topic real quick. I know you might want to go, but there's one topic that we don't talk about because it's not correct to talk about. Women get offended. Women expect everything to be a compliment, and men relate in ways that are like how you relate to another man is the way you relate to a woman. So you'll come along and go, it'd be a lot better if you did it this way. And a woman will go, could you go back and reframe that? You just upset me. You know, I'm not listening until you, it's like, it's not happening. You have to
I kind of do a joke about that in my act. I said, you know, women and men hear things differently. And I give an example. I said, you know, my wife, maybe she'll like be cooking in the kitchen, and I'll come through and say, you know, maybe you should put some salt in that soup. And what she hears is, you stupid bitch, put some salt in the soup or I'll fucking divorce you. I hate you. And it's just how men and women process. You know, I wouldn't say it's just women, though. There's big YouTubers that I've tried to give suggestions to. This one guy, all the time, awesome, awesome, awesome. This is awesome. This is awesome. That's awesome. And using it in a wrong context, because if you, and people throw these, what they call filler words in. Literally. Now, if you're going to use the word literally, then you got to know what it means, which means, I was literally thrown across the room and hit the wall. That means that actually happened. You were literally thrown. So when people say, I literally died, no, or you'd be dead. You know, so I see people using words wrong, and believe me, and I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I got halfway through college, but you know, if you're going to speak to people, learn how to speak and learn how to not be annoying and have a pleasant. So, you know, people think that's why they have directors. That's why they invented directors, so you can have a third eye to help you. And if you're open to that, then again, you'll grow. And if you don't, you won't.
That's right. That's right. I'm open to it anytime I can get feedback. And you have to be smart enough. You have to be centered enough to know who you are. So when feedback comes, you don't just reject it, but you say, well, does that fit my persona? Does that fit who I am?
And it depends on where the feedback's coming from. I mean, you know, some guy that, you know, is an insurance agent, you know, don't come up and give me advice about, which I don't have happen hardly ever. But, you know, you know, if Jay Leno came up to me and said, you know, Bill, if you're going to do that, I think you're going to be a little bit better then I would listen.
Totally. And then like taking advice from other comedians, maybe it's good advice for them, or maybe they're coming from an area in their life where it was necessary feedback for them, but maybe it's not for you. But the worst thing you can do is reject feedback. You got to
listen to it and consider it. I think and consider the source. Consider the source and who's talking to you and what they know. What do they do? I always love it when club owners would come up to me and go, well, you know, I think you should. I go, wait a minute. Aren't you a club owner? Well, yeah. I go, you're not a comedian, right? Well, no. I said, well, listen, when you can get up on that stage and make people laugh pretty fucking hard for 10 minutes, then we can talk. But don't come up here trying to give me your club owner advice on how to do my act.
Wow.
And I get people, I've had many conversations like that. I come, don't tell me. And then, you know, there are people that I have met people that, writers that don't do stand-up but understand comedy. But, you know, ultimately, you're the director, you're the producer, you're the performer, you're the person that does all this. So ultimately, it's up to you.
Yes. In wrapping up, Bill Kirchenbauer, I'd like to ask, you know, the pandemic hit and it's thrown everybody in a tizzy. People are up in arms at the politically correct thing, taking a bite out of our freedom of speech on stage. Then we got the whole Black Lives Matter thing finally maybe making headway. What do you have to say to encourage people to just hang in there right now?
Well, I will say, as far as my act, I don't do and never have done anything political. Mostly because I've never thought people were all that smart and paid it. I mean, I'm the only person on my entire block that gets the newspaper, okay? So that's who I feel I'm talking to. So I never do any political material. Not only that, but because I want it to last. And anything political you do, 6 months isn't, people aren't going to remember it. People aren't going to relate to it. That's two reasons I don't do political stuff. The other reason is I just, anyway, so I don't do political stuff. As far as the PC stuff, I'm not that PC. I think a lot of the stuff that I watch is bland and whitewashed and just kind of like something that needs salt and pepper. And I do what I want. I hate pretending. Excuse me, right in the middle of the pandemic, I cough. I hate pretending things are the way they aren't. And so I always speak the truth. Boy, sometimes I pay the price for it. People don't want to hear the truth. They don't want to hear that, the emperor's got no clothes. I've always been that, but there's that big source of people. George Carlin was a great truth speaker. And he got flack from some people. That's what you're going to get. Johnny Carson once said, you can't make everybody happy. And he's absolutely right. So when you're trying to make everybody happy. So I just do what I do. I don't do political stuff. And so that kind of keeps a lot of that away. I just do stuff. I do ranting and griping. And I try to make those subjects that a lot of people, like airports and lines and stuff like that can relate to. So I don't find that whether you're, Republican or Democrat or whatever, libertarian, I also try, when you're a really good comedian, you should be able to make anybody laugh. And I pride myself on that. I could go to a college right now and I think, and do great. And I could go to an old folks home and do great. And I get on cruise ships and you should be able to make everybody laugh. Cruise ships are a great separator of comedians, because you go on there, there's a nice mix of everybody, young, old, everybody on there. And I know a lot of comedians that do great at their hip little comedy clubs where they're from, but they get on a cruise ship or they go to a corporate show and they die. They die because that college material doesn't fly there. So you should be able to make just about anybody laugh. But I will say that I could go to a college right now and make college kids laugh. But a lot of the younger college comedians types that I see could not go to an older people. And I've talked to younger comedians. They said, I had bunch of old people yesterday. I had to do a club with a bunch of old people. I said, well, how old were they? So, well, they're like 65, 70 years old. I said, you know what? Those aren't Lawrence Welk old people. All those people are dead. I said, these are hippie old people. These people were running around naked, smoking pot, dropping acid, and going to Woodstock and doing all that shit and going off to Vietnam. So this is not your Lawrence Welk old people. These people are very hip. They just look old. And I think I'm one of them. It's not the same old people that a lot of people talk. Oh, and those are the Lawrence Welk type thing, but they're all gone. That's all their comedians are gone too, unfortunately. But that's the older ones, and the people now that are 65, 70 years old, they're hip. They're just buried underneath all those wrinkles.
Who was your favorite comedian of all time? Living?
Oh, George Carlin.
Yeah.
George Carlin, he was a friend of mine. I did my first Tonight Show with him. He was one of the judges in the Los Angeles comedy competition that I won in the 70s. I did a couple Tonight shows, and we remained friends. And I saw him perform many, many times. Just like I was saying in Vegas, there was a period of his time when people were coming to see the hippy dippy weatherman and seeing a whole different George Carlin. Got up and they walked out. They couldn't handle it because he was talking about getting all the murderers and everybody and electrocuting them all at once. And just this really hardcore type of, not hippy dippy weatherman. And they walked up, but he paid that price. But you know what? He spoke the truth. He stayed true to himself. He was very funny. He was extremely prolific. He was a master wordsmith. He was a very, very sweet man. And he was just, to me, he encompassed, he was not only a comedian, but he was a philosopher. And I think when people watch him in 25, 50 years, they'll still go, oh, yeah.
Wow.
So George gets my vote.
My sister let me go with her to a gym one time, and George Carlin was in there.
Oh.
And I was on a treadmill, and there were mirrors everywhere. So I was noticing through the reflection that the left side of somebody's face looked like George Carlin. So I went to the other end of the gym to see the reflection the opposite way. Still looked like George Carlin. So I asked the guy on the treadmill next to me, doesn't that look like, he says, it is. And I said, how do you know for sure? And he goes, I'm his road manager. And I said, what's he really like? And he said, he's a pain in the ass.
Oh, did he say that? Well, I can imagine. I've seen George carry on conversations with busboys about comedy. And so, but he can be a little edgy too, but he was edgy, but he was always very, very nice to me.
Well, the thing is, he passed away not long after I saw him, so I don't know that he was healthy. Yeah, it might have been.
Yeah. One of my favorite possessions that I have is a book, one of his books that he wrote. I forget which one it was. And I was meeting with him somewhere, so I took the book along. And I said, no, I know, it was a comedy awards, and they gave out the book. Everybody got a copy of the book. So afterwards, at the wrap party thing, I went up to him and, oh, Bill, how you doing? I said, George, would you sign my book? I said, I've never asked you for an autograph before. I said, but would you sign this book? So he said, sure. So he wrote it. He scribbled something in it. And, I talked a little bit more and we walked off. I opened up the book and he wrote, to Bill, you funny fuck, George Carlin.
Aww.
So that's one of my most prized possessions. So if anybody ever starts claiming, well, you're not funny, I just go, whose opinion do we trust here? You or George Carlin?
Oh my gosh. What a great story to have George Carlin in your pocket like that.
Yeah.
Wow.
He was a nice guy. I learned a lot from him.
Thank you so much for this interview.
Sure, Linda.
Where can we follow you to help your numbers?
Well, if they go to halfanour.com, that's HAFFENHAUER, halfanour.com. And a lot of my podcasts, I'm getting a lot of interesting people, comedians, non-comedians. I'm of the firm belief that if you talk to anybody long enough, you'll find an interesting story. Exactly. And so we have, but mostly it's people I know. So a lot of them are comedians and comedic writers, but we have a lot of fun. We got Adam Markin is coming on, and Bill Engvall's been on the show. And I got a lot of people coming up that are people that have not been on Mark Maron's show. His podcast. He had a lot of comedians, but he's neglected a lot of them. And so I'm going to put them online.
Good.
So it's halfanour.com.
halfanour.com. Yes, sirree. We'll get them on there. I'll post this and I'll put Half an Hour on there, halfanour.com. And if I make any typos, I know you're not going to be afraid to tell me to correct something. So I appreciate it.
I'm not an expert in the English language. I just know how to use it, I think. All right. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you so much, Bill Kirchenbauer. Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Everybody's